Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk about something a little bit serious about women's safety, and I want to weave it into astrology, how you can protect yourself. If you don't know me, my name is Jaymie. I am your Scorpio AF astrologer, and I teach rabbit hole astrology, and I talk about the nitty gritty things when it comes to traumas, trauma healings, the trauma triggers, the trauma loops, all of those things. And I wanted to talk recently about something that happened to me because I think that this is something that's important for a lot of women who have probably faced a lot of these things. Unfortunately, statistically, a lot of women experience abuse. And so I want to take a moment to talk about that, especially with what's going on with the stars right now. And this is because we do live in a toxic patriarchal society, and this does put women at risk in certain ways. Now, this isn't to say that men aren't at risk, that women aren't violent. Of course, this is the case, but I'm speaking from my experiences. And something that recently happened made me realize, oh, sometimes it's not always a safe environment to say something that may seem benign. I mentioned something about living in a toxic patriarchal society, and someone got really upset about it. But instead of having an honest conversation and saying, like, hey, this is something that upset me and bothered me, the conversation continued. I was asked a question, told that I wasn't answering it, getting talked over. And then next thing you know, the person was like, I have to walk away. You're so stupid, and then continued to say that I was assaulting him, which was really unsettling and confusing. But the situation is that sometimes there are signs and clues that we overlook because we don't think that it's a big deal, and we're seeing things from our own projected reality, and we don't always recognize that it's not always a safe place to discuss certain things. And sometimes when people don't understand things for the way things are happening, their perception of reality is different from yours. And so this is why it's so important to trust your intuition, and when you feel unsafe, to not rationalize it, which is something that I believe a lot of women do in order to not feel crazy. And there's just different narratives that we're trying to make sure that we don't fit into. But the thing is, usually when there's an unsafe situation, it's not it doesn't necessarily make sense to feel uneasy. The reactions aren't necessarily justified and stuff. It's not really necessarily an environment that makes a lot of sense. So I just want to remind you of how important it is to really trust your intuition. And this is a great time right now to really focus on these things because the sun is in Scorpio, and so the sun is basically, it's spotlighting truth energy to scorpionic themes, which is about trauma triggers, trauma loops, trauma healing. It's shadiness, unfortunately, sometimes violence. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that everyone experiences, but this is just something that it does depend on a lot of different things in your chart. But at some point in your life, something will happen that unfortunately puts us at risk. And so during this time, it's a great opportunity to kind of look at the things that are around. What are some of the psychological things and traumas that you've experienced that has put you at risk, that has made you react, where sometimes people, and I do this as well, where we over explain or we defend ourselves, or we may normalize trauma or not realize that something is actually dangerous because we're so used to it. And when the sun is illuminating in the sign of trauma, it's easier for us to see things for the way things are. The other thing that's going on right now is that we do have Mercury retrograding in Sagittarius, and Mars is here as well. And it's a close conjunction. And so basically and Mercury are basically meeting each other. And this is such a great time to kind of focus on these things, because the thing is that the next sign is always the resource of the previous sign. And so the next sign of Scorpio, of traumas, triggers, and stuff, is Sagittarius. So while Scorpio is about going through the dark night of the soul, there's like this heaviness energy. Sagittarius is about seeing things from a higher perspective. It's optimistic. They're both really strategic signs. And so, with Mercury being in the sign of Sagittarius, this is an excellent time to focus on seeing things from a higher perspective, from your higher mind. How would you approach things if you had a healthy distance to something? What is the best way for you to communicate? What habits and practices and mindsets would you follow? How would you handle conflict, anger, and problems, and just overall issues and aggression, which is what Mars represents? This is kind of a good time to reflect on these things for those of you who may need to hear this information. There's a lot of different ways to work with this, such as working with your personal goals and processing your psychological traumas, but also just connecting with your desires in a way and magnetizing resources from others and being collaborative in a way that helps you to achieve your desired results in your personal goals. And if this is something that you'd like guidance on, comment below and I can make another video. But I specifically wanted to share the experience that I went through because I believe that it's something that can be really helpful. When I first went through this, I reached out to a friend of mine who's also who's a doctor who's done a lot of research. Like, this is her like job. Like, she has done studies on, or she has studied neuroscience as her undergrad and all of these different things. And I learned some really interesting stuff, and it made me really want to come on here and share it for anyone who needs to hear this information, who will benefit from it, or if you know someone who can benefit from this information. And this is because when I got really frustrated with this situation, I felt a certain type of way. In order to keep me safe, there was the mother and the wife that had to keep me away from this person, where the situation escalated to such an unnecessary degree. And something that I want to remind people is that it's really important to surround ourselves with people who handle conflict in a healthy way. This is something that's so important because disagreements in and of itself shouldn't be dangerous and should be dealt with in a mature way, but not everyone knows how to do that. And so there was this separation that was kept, and I'm grateful for it, but I also felt like there was complacency taking place, permissive, like this permissive behavior that sort of perpetuated the situation, that left me feeling really frustrated because as a non-mom, not understanding what motherhood is like, I felt like the mother failed me. And as a result of, and failed the son as well. And I'm not excusing the behavior or anything, but coming from an empathetic place, I recognize that the son also, this person who has violent tendencies, and this is everyone who has violent, like, the tools weren't provided in order to help manage the anger. And I think it's because the parents didn't know how to offer that. But as a result, this has led to someone who's unfortunately very violent. And as a result, it puts other people at risk, particularly because if it's small things that can escalate into something that's really dangerous, it's hard, and someone is attached to that sort of state and nervous system, so they are constantly circling themselves back into that state and struggle with getting out of that state. It puts people at risk. And I was starting to get really frustrated, where I was also feeling a certain type of way about the parent, and thinking like, okay, like, I really wish the like there was a different type of this person was raised differently, and then I wouldn't be in this situation. And I felt like it was unfair to everyone involved. And I didn't know if I had a right to feel that way. So I spoke to a friend of mine who was a mother herself of both girls and boys, and asked for advice. And again, this is someone who has done a lot of research, is a doctor, and I completely trust this person's information. And it was really powerful. She said that she told me, she said, Jaymie, I understand that you don't want to victim blame, but what are the facts here? The mother failed to raise a healthy, adjusted child, and as a result, has failed you because it's put your safety at risk. And then tells me, Jaymie, do you know who creates serial killers? Mothers. And she said that mothers have so much power over their children more than fathers, especially when it comes to boys. And the research was showing that the being abused from the mother can create more problems with the son. But there is a, again, pattern. Okay, I'm not saying that this is 100%. When a son is witnesses the father abusing the mother in a normalized setting, this typically, like, it teaches or models behavior that's considered to be appropriate and things of that nature. Whereas if the father had abused the the actually, no, we're not even going to talk about that. And so there are signs that she told me that, you can kind of look out for. And it was really interesting. And the thing that really shocked me and something that I wasn't aware of is that she mentioned that the recovery rate for abusive men is really low. It's the chances of them healing and growing and changing is such a low statistic. It's like as low as 2%, which blew my fucking mind. I had no fucking idea. And the other thing is that oftentimes when abusive people, from the data that I was informed about, I don't know what the data is for abusive women, but for abusive men, it was showing that abusive men who go into one-on-one therapy can statistically tend to get worse or not get better. And so there's actually two specific support groups for men that are designed and has a higher measurable success rate. So if this is something that you guys want to know about, comment below and let me know, because I can get that information for you. You can also look it up yourself too. It's specifically support groups for violent men, and look for the two that are known to have the highest success rate. And so I found this to be just such an interesting correlation here. And so I wanted to take the time to share this because that kind of paints a story of how much it can put people at risk. And so it's really about asking yourself, because oftentimes abusive relationships are often seen under like the pretense of domestic violence, of spousal relationships and stuff. It's not always the case. It wasn't the case with me, but there are like these patterns that's really alarming. And so what's interesting is that the statistics show that the men, again, generalizations here, the men who have this pattern of being abusive tend to be emotionally, psychologically, and verbally abusive, but they don't necessarily act out in a physically violent manner where you can go to the cops and say, hey, this is what this person did to harm me. And so they can continue the abuse. So I would actually argue that when it's not physical, it's more insidious, because there's less of it's not as explicit, it's not as black and white, and so it's easier for the abuse to continue. And this is why I think it's so important to trust yourself. Something that I see a lot in Facebook groups and stuff is people will say, oh, like my partner did something and I found it to be really controlling or manipulative, but they've never done anything this bad before, and things of that nature. But the thing is, whenever someone is trying to be controlling, manipulative, in an emotionally, psychological, verbal way that's restricting your autonomy and makes you feel unsafe, this is something to really keep an eye out for, because you may think that it's not that serious, but actually it's such a red flag, and it can continue, it can perpetuate. And I think that we live in a world that sees abuse as being physical in nature, ignoring the emotional, psychological, and verbal abuse, but that's actually the ones that tend to perpetuate. And so this is something that I wanted to leave you with, because with the statistic of saying that the recovery rate of abusive men is 2%, that's like basically saying when you're in an environment where you don't feel safe, or you know you're being mistreated, it's like almost saying that you have a 98% chance of getting abused and for it to continue. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what's best for you. You know, it's kind of like when people like discourage foster parents from adopting, because people say like, oh, the adopted kids don't appreciate you. And yes, like a lot of them do have challenges and problems, but I don't think that that means people shouldn't consider adopting. Like every situation is different, and you don't know if the statistic actually applies to you, right? But this is to say that, so for that reason, I don't care if it's 2%. I don't want to sit here and tell you what to do, but understand that there is such a high risk when it comes to abusive situations. And so I really do want to encourage you to be mindful and remind you that we live in a world with billions and billions and billions of effing people. Okay, like, is this really a situation that you want to continue to be in? Like, you may really care about a person, you may want to be with them, or whatever the case may be, whether it's romantic, whether it's platonic, whatever the situation is. But there are so many more options than we realize. Statistics show that we actually have multiple soulmates as it is. So, you know, I'm not saying that we should constantly be looking for an upgrade and look for something that's better, but if you don't have a fear of losing someone, if you don't have a fear of getting rejected or feeling abandoned, would you actually want to put up with this person? Is this something that you're okay with? What is the highest ideal version of you? What would she put up with? What would be okay with you? What isn't okay with you? This is a great opportunity and a great time to work on this right now, while we have the Sun in Scorpio, Mercury retrograding in Sagittarius in a close conjunction with Mars. Like I said, thankfully, this is something that not everyone has experienced, and that's great. This took me by surprise, because every several years, like, something crazy happens, and I'm just kind of like, oh my God, I didn't see this coming and stuff. But whether you've experienced abuse or not, we all experience some sort of unfairness, whether it's something that we inflict on ourselves, whether it's something we do to other people, whether it's something that's been done to us. But this is the time to really reflect on what sort of abuse, shadiness, injustice, something that's not okay, that's causing harm. What does that look like? How has that affected your confidence, your creativity? Has it kept you from being able to express yourself in a way that allows you to really be who you are? That's the energy of Sun in Scorpio. Think about what that looks like for you. And think about with Mercury, your mindset, speaking, what you learn, what you think. How has it affected these areas of your life? The higher version of yourself, the higher mind, the idealized version of yourself that's healed. How would she handle situations like this? What would you do? And what are some actions? This is Mars in Sagittarius here, in your higher mind. What action would you take? What things can you do to shift your mindset, to shift your daily environment, so that you can heal and become that healed version of yourself that feels confident, that expresses yourself in a way that's really beneficial for you? This is pretty much what I want to leave you with. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.